Hi, welcome to what is usually known as politics for people who hate politics. Today it's a little more like aliens for people who hate aliens. Love aliens? No, I don't know. It's one of those things where I no longer know what the real title of the show is because our topic is very, very strange and very, very not skeptical. So we do have Dan Beer of the Skeptical Libertarian on. He is the official fun ruiner for this to talk about aliens. I mean, it even says so right there under his name. Aliens, etc., let's call it. We have Meg Gilliland, whose name I struggle with, much like I struggle with Andrew Carell's. There's like a certain thing about the consonants, so I just have to like struggle. I'm sorry, my love for Meg is deep though and true. We also have Seth Wilson, who sometimes writes things at Cult Western, and we like him. He has strong feelings about Sasquatch.
Yeah.
We have Zach Fontaine, who does musical things, and has a song about an alien, if I recall. Do you have a song about an alien? You do.
I do, and I have a song about UFOs, but it's more of a love song.
Good.
But,
We're going to link to that when we post this. It's going to be
all
good.
right.
And we have, who is probably the catalyst for this podcast topic, Todd Seavey.
Hi there.
Who is a skeptic, but has fallen deep into the rabbit hole of aliens lately. No, it's okay. It's not. We're not undermining his credibility because it means he's fun, and that's what we like.
All right.
People who are not fun is my brother Joe, who is such a basic bitch that he had to go to the gym instead of talking about aliens with us. That is rough. That's I don't even know what to do with that. I don't know where to begin. I want to start off with something basic, which I guess is, what's your favorite thing that doesn't probably exist, but that's not fun anyway? I love the Mothman. I'm just gonna do this. Refrain from hooting and hollering this time, Todd. It's my beautiful Mothman shirt. When I was 15, I went to Point Pleasant, West Virginia to go to Mothman Fest, which is just as weird, Americana-y, and like awkward and great as it sounds. I highly recommend it. It continues to this day every year in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. So that's good. I love the Mothman. Seth, what manner of creature do you like that probably doesn't exist, but that's not fun?
Oh, me?
Yeah, share with the
I
class.
think that Steph, and I was like, there's no Steph in the script.
I do know your name.
Boy, I just shot this down right out of the gate. I like the Sasquatch. I think he's awesome. And I think if you kill Sasquatch to prove he exists, then we should be allowed to kill you to prove that you exist.
Wow, that's heavy. I mean, you shouldn't kill Sasquatch.
But then kill Sasquatch, and we'll leave you alone.
All right, let's do, Zach, what creature has captured your heart, or entity? I mean, we'll keep it loose.
You know, I was like chupacabras. You know, I thought maybe,
Very selfless.
I'd have one. Yeah. I thought, maybe I'd like tame one, have it as a pet or as a friend someday. Yeah. It's tough picking a favorite, but I like those. Aliens, of course. Can't go wrong.
But they exist.
Well, that's true. Spoiler
Let's move
alert.
to the next question, Meg. Meg, what's your favorite creature, Meg, or entity?
So, well, I mean, I would go with aliens, except, as I just mentioned, they do exist.
All right, we'll get to that.
Sorry.
So I would have to go with Mothman as well, and I did not know about this beautiful festival.
Oh, it's so
How
good.
did I not know?
They should have told you, Meg.
They
should
should
told
have.
you.
Mothman should have come and told me. So I'm actually super excited to go to this strange festival.
We should go.
We're going to. It's absolutely happening.
I also
2015 dates have not been announced yet, but
I saw. I was like refreshing the website for
it
5 days.
would literally be the happiest moment of my life if we all just went to Mothman Fest, and then Dan could come along and just ruin everything, and it would be great.
and there's a museum. There's a museum too. Like we could go to the museum at any time. It's open like all the time.
It was not open yet when I went there. It was a bit more primitive in my day. Todd, what about you? Are you still going to go with aliens, or you can opine on another favorite if you have one?
Well, I just say briefly after 30 years of being a hardcore skeptic who doesn't believe in God, ghosts, psychic powers, horoscopes, telekinesis, any of it. I always thought, like, if there are any UFOs of interest, why is it always like, one bumpkin out in the middle of nowhere? Why aren't there convincing cases where there are multiple independent witnesses, and the thing is not only seen visually but tracked on radar, preferably by multiple radars? And it turns out there are countless such cases. And in fact, multiple governments have been terrified about what that means for about 70 years, and multiple governments have come to the conclusion that something is going on. And ours is really the only government that has double talked about it and said half the time there's nothing to it, it's all just misperception, and the other half the time has secretly, desperately tried to figure out what they are. That doesn't make them aliens.
Now we're getting somewhere, Todd. Thank you.
Could be weird meteorological phenomena, could be military, could all still be misperception, but it's much more complicated and much more convincing than I ever would have guessed as a casual skeptic, and not even a casual skeptic, a guy who's written for Skeptical Inquirer and things like that for 30 years. I never would have imagined that there was as strong a case for the UFOs as there is, whereas I would say there is no case for any other paranormal or conspiracy phenomena I know of. Much as I would have, if you would ask me to bet which one was most plausible, like 20 years ago, I probably would have bet on Bigfoot, only because not because
Seth,
I think
this one's for you.
Not because I think there's any good evidence for him, but rather because that would probably require the least adjustment to the way we see the world. In other words, if you found out there were psychic powers, that changes physics and stuff. If you found out there's just a big ape in North America, you'd be like, oh, we got an ape. That's interesting. Right. But we probably don't have an ape.
Or the Yeti, though, which is probably even more probable. And Sir Evan Hillary went to look for it and found nothing. But at least he bothered to look. I mean.
and crucially, Spike TV offered, $10 million for finding a Bigfoot, and still nobody found it. So by the basic principles of Austrian economics, I think we can, we can pretty much write off Bigfoot now.
Going along with what Todd said, I heard something interesting the other day on a podcast that the government put so much time and attention into trying to figure out what exactly is going on with UFOs. We said, like, what if what's going on is so scary and the CIA knows about it, that selling crack to kids and like assassinating like priests is actually the next best option. Like,
God!
That's the most terrifying thing you can think of.
It is! Like, it's one of those things where, like, my spine crinkled. It's like, that's crazy. I don't believe that. My spine was like, yeah, I do. Yeah. So that's not good.
And by the way, just one quick example out of far too many that are now burned into my brain of how much interest the government has taken in all this over the years. And of course, probably none of us in this conversation think that government taking an interest in it makes it a legit topic. But the first director of the CIA, who happened to be director during the Roswell incident, whatever that was,
right?
He officially chastised Congress publicly for not looking into UFOs more, and claimed the Air Force was concealing extraterrestrials. First director of the CIA, and maybe he was joking. I don't know, but he said it. He actually sent a formal letter to Congress and said, "We have to tell the Air Force to stop covering this up. It's really important." I don't know. You'd think the CIA ought to be in a position to know.
So I want to tell you guys, Dan needs to ruin some of the things Todd said, probably. But, like, okay, I read this book about Area 51 like 2 years ago, and it seemed like, like a legitimate book about it. Like, Area 51 is a real place. It's full of real secrets. Like, we know this, right? It was, it was not officially admitted to exist until the 90s. We know it's an air base. It's not made up out of whole cloth. And I was hoping for kind of a meta history where it was like, the stories about aliens started, in this year and all that sort of thing. And I read the whole thing, and it seemed very credible, like a real history book, until the final chapter, where the woman uses her interview with an unnamed supposed former employee of I'm totally blanking on the air. Well, the point is that the explanation for Roswell was Joseph Mengele made hideous child hybrid creatures, and they piloted a aircraft that Stalin sent, and the entire purpose was like a meta sort of like scaring the U.S. type thing. Like, it was the one explanation you could find that was sounded more ridiculous than actual aliens. And I read this book and I was like, what the hell is this? I thought I was reading a history book.
So you don't believe that theory?
No! She didn't even write, like, okay, this guy who, professed to work there told me this ridiculous story, look how crazy it is, like, here it is. That would have been okay. She just wrote it down like, well, we've got it, guys, that's it.
Right.
So sometimes things are more ridiculous than aliens.
One interesting thing that reminds me of is that I think all skeptics, in the sense of participation in the so-called skeptics movement, would agree that the gold standard, as it were, is when you've actually got like laboratory evidence, physical evidence, empirical evidence. But it's interesting that as journalists, as I think everybody here is, that a lot of times you have to draw conclusions from what I guess you could loosely call journalistic rather than scientific evidence.
Mm-hmm.
In the sense that if it's a question not like what's the melting point of gold, but is Russia planning to invade more of Ukraine, a lot of times that's going to be based on bits and pieces of data. So I knew for years as a young skeptic that none of these UFO believers seemed to have any laboratory evidence or convincing physical samples. It's interesting how good a job some of them have done in the journalistic sense of tracking down through Freedom of Information Act requests and stuff the documents revealing the government's great interest in this topic. And there are a couple of guys named Carey and Schmidt who wrote a book called Witness to Roswell. They're not as skeptical as they should be, but it is kind of hilarious if you sort of sympathize with zealots and obsessives, how much genuine journalistic effort they went into to track down every living person who could still be around, who would have been a witness to events back in Roswell at the time. And none of it proves there were aliens there, but it does prove that everybody in town thought, or like most of the people in town thought there were while it was going on, including the military base commanders, who in some cases left affidavits that were supposed to be revealed only after their deaths saying, I acted on the belief we were dealing with wreckage from an alien spaceship and believed that, though I did not see them with my own eyes, we were dealing with the disposal of alien bodies at the request of the Pentagon and so forth.
Oh, no.
The whole town, I mean, it could just show how rumors run amok in a small town, but the whole town, which was filled with military officials, because it's right next to a military base, it wasn't just a bunch of farmers and yokels in the sticks, basically thought they were dealing with a crashed alien saucer, which is what the first military press release claimed after all, and within a day they backpedaled and said, no, it was a weather balloon, and 50 years later said, we lied about the weather balloon, it was actually a very special spy balloon with a big disc-shaped sonar detector attached to it.
I mean, isn't that the most credible explanation? And the fact that eyewitnesses suck and the military personnel aren't magically, I mean, they're not scientists, they're not necessarily much credible. Dan?
By the way, if I don't see my face, does that mean I'm not cropping up?
You're here.
Oh, okay.
You're not. The likelihood of aliens in like a real, like, grown-up and sort of disappointing way, but also comforting because I was really scared of aliens when I was a child.
Oh.
The possibility of aliens seems unlikely, and we seem to be lacking proof.
Well, I mean, the probability that alien life exists somewhere in the universe is, we don't have any idea because we don't actually have any data whether it's likely or not that there are other aliens, but to imagine that the Earth is the only place that has life, you have to imagine that whatever happened here is the only thing in trillions of stars in hundreds of billions of galaxies in 13.7 billion years to have ever happened. That's like the most unlikely thing that's ever happened. And I don't think any of the explanations for the origin of life on Earth suggest that it's that unlikely. So I think there are probably other, life forms out there, other civilizations, but I think it's very interesting that we only start talking about aliens once our own race is now actually able to travel into space, and we start thinking about other planets, and then all of these, UFO reports, like, we know that there are other things that exist, like airplanes and weather balloons and swamp gas and whatever else you want to, and hallucinations. I mean, like 90% of the UFO reports in New Jersey are, I swear to God, the result of people getting drunk outside the Air Force Base in the woods out there. I know because, I've done that. So,
And did you see aliens?
I mean, we know that alcohol is a thing that exists, and we know that people are not reliable witnesses. And so I think it would just be a big coincidence. Like, I'm not saying that aliens couldn't visit Earth, like we don't know about the possible technology of traveling between stars or whatever, but it would be amazing if they came to Earth just now. Like, the Earth is like 4.5 billion years old. Like, isn't it more likely that sometime in the last 4.5 billion years they came here and it was a barren rock and there was nothing interesting, and then they're like, oh, this sucks, and then they left.
No.
Dan, I really feel like you've never watched Ancient Aliens.
It's a great
Ancient
Oh my God! No, I have watched
the Ancient Astronauts.
Wait, so that means we're the aliens?
Astronaut theorists believe that Dan is a jerk. No, I'm just kidding.
We know what happened. Aliens came here millions of years ago, and they imprisoned Tom Cruise in a little box. And then they left, and then the volcano exploded, and then Tom Cruise made Cocktail.
Is that the basic timeline? Is that?
Yes.
That's more plausible to me. That's more plausible.
I will say, of course, I share Dan's desire to use Occam's razor to come up with the simplest possible explanation. It is interesting, though, I think just as sort of a limbering mental exercise for skeptics to ask ourselves whether we might be drawn to simple explanations without having much more evidence for them than for the crazy explanations the believers love. So, for example...
You don't have to prove, you don't have to prove that aliens don't exist. You have to prove they do exist. that's...
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But sometimes we're right. But skeptics, having dismissed the paranormal explanation, will sometimes light upon an alternative explanation. Almost.
Oops, mother of God! Damn it! I have failed everything.
You muted Todd, so I'm just going to jump in here and say...
Yeah, please do. That was my keyboard being angry. Sorry, Todd.
Oh, all right. Okay, well, since you've still muted him, most even UFO believers will say that, 90% of the sightings are crap. Their evidence is bad. They're not good. But there's, a few cases that are, much more compelling. That there's something else going on here that's not explained like the other 99% of cases are. And I just think that that's not particularly likely. What are the odds that we know people fabricate things and make up stories and misinterpret things? What are they and the fact that the government is interested in this is just proof that the government is composed of the same idiots that everyone else is. And people who are paranoid about people who are fucking Dennis Kucinich thinks he saw an alien spacecraft.
Right.
He's fucking Dennis Kucinich. That's not a reliable eyewitness in my book.
That was Jimmy Carter. So that your argument is starting to win me over.
Well, plus, I think people are gonna see that stuff if they look for it. I love looking at the stars and looking in a dark sky, and I see weird stuff move around and zip around in ways that are, that are different than seeing a plane or anything. But I think it's whether you see that and think, oh, that looks neat, or whether you are obsessed with finding a UFO and think that's what it is. So I think there's definitely a lot of bias in the in the eyewitness sense.
Here's the problem, which is that if you want to say that a new species exists, you have to have a type specimen. You have to have a body. And you can say that the government is covering it up, and Bigfoots are really scarce, or aliens are like their bodies evaporate when they die, or something. But that's just a special pleading. Like at some point, you actually have to have a crashed spaceship and a dead body, and saying, look, this is a new species, and here's the proof, and here's the evidence. And I think that the fact that we've never had that means that
I think in a philosophical sense, that is not an accurate understanding of how skepticism works. And one of the reasons I wish skeptics would talk about this more is that I don't think they've thought through their epistemology as carefully as they think they have. So, for instance, they'll have a tendency to say, we can't say aliens exist as long as there's some other more down-to-earth explanation like ball lightning. But there's not that much evidence for ball lightning. There's more evidence for aliens than there is for ball lightning in some important sense. So at some point, you do have to ask, how much subjective wiggle room have the skeptics left themselves to pick the explanations they find more comforting because they're not as weird? So you can't just make stuff up like, oh, I think it was the Intergalactic Federation and their ghosts and so forth. But just because you can think of some earthly explanation doesn't necessarily mean it's all that plausible. Just to give one example, for the giant silent hovering triangles that have been seen with great frequency by multiple witnesses and tracked on radar all over the Earth, the official British Ministry of Defense explanation at one point, this is the best they could come up with, was maybe there are spontaneously occurring electrical balls of plasma that tend to shape themselves into geometric patterns like triangles and then hover in relation to Earth's magnetic field without moving at all, and induce hallucinations because of their electromagnetic field that cause people to think they saw other details of the craft, such as metal and so forth. That was like their official explanation. And again, I'm not saying all skeptics endorse that, but it's a reminder of how, in the desperation to come up with a less weird explanation, you can turn into a crank, which is different from like an outright believer, in that you keep trying desperately to come up with some simpler explanation that may, without you realizing it, be more complicated than the most obvious one. So I don't know.
Sure, but I just don't think that aliens are intergalactic, travelers from space who are very cagey about ever being seen or photographed or, meeting any people in public in broad daylight. Like, I just don't see that as ever being the most likely explanation. So, I'm not saying that like any of these like earthly explanations where you just sort of ad hoc come up with something that, crazy explanations. You're right. Like, I don't have an explanation. I'm not saying I can explain every UFO sighting, but they are UFO sightings.
Right.
They're
unidentified. They technically do exist.
Unidentified doesn't make them aliens.
Yep. Oh, yeah, and I'm not saying it does either. I will say, I think also skeptics have had a tendency, myself included, I suppose, when I was younger, to make up, without quite realizing it, things that are almost iron laws of low alien probability. So they used to say things like, it's very implausible aliens would go across many, many light years to get here and then just buzz a farm and go away. That seems implausible. But actually, if they do the sort of things we do, like send out cheap unmanned probes, maybe that's not so implausible. Maybe the last thing they would do is send a diplomatic delegation or declare war against some insect-like petty species. But they might send out some cheap probes. Maybe we have been cheaply probed for decades. I'm just saying,
cheap. After that,
this is all assuming that creatures from far, far away from some completely different culture would have anything close to reasoning like ours. Like, we can't. If something's truly alien, then I don't believe aliens exist. But if something truly was alien, we would probably have no yardstick by which to measure their intentions or the way that they reason things. Especially if they had sensory capabilities we didn't have, like they could see the electromagnetic spectrum or something. There's no way we could know what their reasoning would be. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, tangent.
No, that was good. That was not a tangent. That was directly related to the alien discussion at hand.
One last example, if I could, of how the temptation to create a simpler narrative might lead us to hastily latch onto one. I was starting to say that in the past decade, these hovering triangles have been more commonly reported than the old flying saucers. So an obvious, tempting explanation there is, oh, people are seeing stealth aircraft, which tend to be like big and black and triangular.
Right.
Except, even though that seems like an obvious correlation, if you start digging into it, the triangle sightings were occurring at least as early as the 1960s, when we didn't have the black triangular military craft we have now. And it looks like there's some sightings that sound almost exactly the same all the way back to the 30s, which doesn't prove they're aliens, but it is a reminder that like the first normal mundane explanation you think of may not cover all cases either. And by the way, even though I have not turned so against my skeptical roots. And by the way, methodologically, I would say I'm still a skeptic, regardless of whether there turns out to be a Bigfoot or a ghost or whatever. I would still be skeptical. I would just say, oh, there's new data. But anyway, I have not turned so unskeptical as to even canvass my Facebook friends about whether they have any paranormal beliefs or have seen UFOs. However, at parties and a few political gatherings, I have chatted about how this topic's a little more complicated than I thought it was with a few small groups of people. So maybe I've asked like 30 people whether they think there's anything to it. And I now know that although, as far as I know, I have never met anyone who saw a flying saucer, I've got 5 acquaintances out of that tiny sample alone who say they have seen the massive hovering silent triangles, which inclines me to think that while they may not be aliens, they exist, which is itself a little odd and unsettling. And at least 3 of these people are fairly well-known political writers, who I won't name because they might be embarrassed. But
Nice.
and they were not all of the same political faction or smoking the same substances or anything.
I think that's interesting, which you mentioned about the way the black triangles sort of look like are sort of stealth aircraft, but that there's sightings that go back to 30s, because before, like, the 30s in the 18th century, we had the great airship craze.
Right.
So
I was going to say,
19th
yeah.
century.
Which kind of was like, are we seeing sort of secret technology, or is this just the human mind sort of projecting these sort of ideas we have onto things?
Right, I mean, when was the last time we saw like a mysterious airship? It was probably like 1893 or something. So that certainly suggests.
Well, I mean,
the theory, there's something out there that we're just putting this on there, or are we just sort of seeing something in the sky, and at the time airship was the thing that we had, was sort of the closest idea we had to what we saw. I mean, I don't understand.
Actually, I think the airships are a fascinating example of how some of this stuff gets a little Rashomon, or at least X-Files-like, in that you could imagine reasonable people latching onto like 3 totally opposed explanations. So, for instance, I'm sure many UFO believers today would say, the airships were described as these big cigar-shaped objects. That must have been early visitations by the cigar-shaped UFOs people sometimes say they see. On the other hand, there were a lot of blimps, or essentially early proto-blimps and balloons that people were excited about in the 19th century. The French were starting to build hot air balloons. So people may have just been imagining or making up stories about things like that, especially given the yellow journalism of the day, which widely reported in 1897 a huge wave of cigar-shaped objects, but may have all been BSing.
The 19th century newspapers, I mean, I almost, like, if it wasn't in the newspaper, I'm going to trust it more. That's how little I trust those newspapers in that era.
Interestingly, 1897 was just a few years before the official unveiling of the first real Zeppelin. Is it possible people were simply seeing prototype, unannounced Zeppelin tests? I don't know. I'm not going to latch onto that and say that's what was going on. But that would be an interesting example of how, even without aliens, there might be something of historical interest going on there. If there were blimps flying around doing test flights in 1897 without people knowing about it, something that we might someday find documentation on stowed away in someone's back room, that in itself would be sort of interesting. Oh, and one more note. Since I always used to think, like, okay, the similarities between these claims and the stuff going on in pop culture is just too coincidental, so I think it's people's imaginations. In other words,
right, the entire Cold War type.
Right. In the 1940s,
correlation
we see flying saucers, and then when X-Files shows some flying triangles, they start seeing flying triangles. It seems like maybe people are just reacting to what's in the zeitgeist. And one thing that might be seen as fodder for that theory is that if you look closely at a lot of the airship claims of the late 19th century, the people seeing those things did not tend to say, "I think it's extraterrestrials." In fact, they would often say things like, "I think it's the French," or I think
might as well be aliens.
well, sometimes they'll say, like, "I think I heard voices." I think I heard voices, and it sounded like it could have been mechanics and engineers working on the thing, and I think there was kind of a basket hanging under it, so it might be a blimp. And only gradually did those sorts of reports seem to turn into the more blatantly extraterrestrial claims about ghost rockets over the Scandinavian countries in the 1940s and flying saucers that were more blatantly extraterrestrial. So it almost seems like there was a sort of steampunk period in UFO claims where it was all about like eccentric foreign scientists. But again, that could be misinterpretation of a real phenomenon, or it could be imagination. In any case, it makes for some good sci-fi stories.
Indeed, it did. Dan, I know that we were on the paranoia chat we had in the summer, and that kind of delved into like a good discussion of why paranoia can be really bad for the world and isn't just like finding Alex Jones amusing when he's complaining about Justin Bieber. But would you agree though, like the alien thing doesn't have as much real world application, and therefore kind of the bullshit aspect doesn't cause as much harm, except maybe to the History Channel? Or like, is it harmful because it's still like not being rigorous and evidence-based about things?
Well, I mean, how harmful are UFO claims? I mean, I'm a real killjoy skeptic type, but I can't really imagine like what the nexus between believing that there are UFOs probing people are and actual harm in the real world. But I mean, you can almost never imagine like, I mean, part of the problem with just uncritically accepting these types of, claims that have no connection to reality. I mean, one problem is you can never really predict like what the harm might be as a result of that. So like the belief that like mercury a preservative that contains mercury in vaccines causes autism. Mm-hmm. This was a claim that was made in 1998 and has been completely refuted since then. But as a result, a lot of parents of autistic children believe that heavy metal toxicity is the result of, and never mind the stuff about like not vaccinating is like dangerous, but like people who believe that mercury was responsible ended up giving their kids chelation therapy, which is a treatment for heavy metal poisoning, which binds metal in the blood and then you filter it out, which is extremely dangerous. And kids have died as a result of this theory that mercury was causing autism. There's no evidence for that. And so just as a result of being unmoored from reality, you couldn't really predict where that was going to lead, but then it ends up with kids in the ER because their parents were getting quacks to give them chelation therapy. So I don't know of any instances of like people trying to cut alien probes out of their body, but like it's hard to, it's just you can't predict where an irrational belief might take you. I don't think that aliens are a really big deal. I would write about them a lot more if I thought that belief in aliens was like causing huge problems. But I really think that like anti-vaccine propaganda is more concerning.
Well, it's much more earthbound. I mean, by definition, it's hard to be.
If there's any harm associated with a belief in aliens or UFOs or something, it would be on the behalf of the state investigating and trying to prepare for the eventuality of aliens showing up with less than friendly intentions. But I mean, what doesn't encourage paranoia on behalf of the state, right? I mean,
right.
I think if Bigfoot was a little bit more credible, we would probably have like automated turrets in the forest looking.
Paranoia about communists people who see communists everywhere are, we're much more of a threat to our society than people who saw aliens everywhere.
I will say, though, that there is something to be said for avoiding baseless fear, even if it has no other consequences besides the fear. I mean, especially for kids. I mean, if you're 8 years old and you have to spend every night frightened of ghosts, that's a real cost. And I don't mean to dismiss that. If there are children out there who are now afraid they're going to be abducted and probed, and in fact there's no good evidence for any sort of odd things in the sky, that is a tragic net loss. Oh, and I should say I have never heard anything remotely convincing along the lines of an abduction story or anything like that. And in general would be very skeptical of any story that starts out in the middle of the night. I woke up and something really bizarre happened. Then I went back to sleep like it never happened almost. That's usually.
And I think Todd does make a good point about how irrational fear is always a cost, and that we shouldn't discount it. But I believe that the history of alien mythology and alien visitation, I believe that it started out as aliens were these benevolent people coming to save us from ourselves, from our warmongering and our nuclear weapons, and they started out as these benevolent forces who were coming to Earth to show us a better way to live. Sort of messianic figures coming down.
It started when, though? I mean, because the earliest concrete, War of the Worlds is the late 19th century. I don't really. If we're talking aliens the way we understand them to be now,
but War of the Worlds was a work of fiction. I mean, people who actually thought there were aliens coming, and they were giving us revelations about how to live a better life. I mean, I think that.
I don't want. I'm not trying to be pedantic, but do you mean aliens as we would kind of understand them now, or vaguely spiritual, higher beings type things?
You could probably.
Well, I think that it's kind of hard to tell the difference. At some point, a sufficiently advanced intelligence is indistinguishable from God.
Yeah.
Magic.
And the current conception of alien invaders kind of evolved gradually over time, so it's hard to pinpoint the first time someone claimed to have seen an alien. If you go back, because if you go back far enough, you've got sky gods and gremlins and things, and then if you get to the 18th or 19th century, you start to get stories about sky vehicles coming down and odd people who still seem human coming out and discoursing about their weird homelands, but it's not blatantly Martian. So the whole idea kind of evolved over time.
I love Men in Black, who are always supposed to look human, but they're not wearing their human suit very well. Mothman Prophecies is all about that. Just they're humans, but they got an uncanny valley vibe, and they think pens are really funny, and they're just not quite right. Sorry, I like Men in Black. They're fun.
Oh, in much the same way that I learned some interesting real things about the CIA from looking into this bizarre topic, and some interesting things about Zeppelins, I did learn something from Bigfoot, I suppose. So I don't think there's any evidence there's a Bigfoot. But as with so many other things in life, the believers were trying to come up with some plausible explanations and theories for how this thing got in the Pacific Northwest. And that's how I learned that it appears there really was, as recently as about 500,000 years ago, a giant 8-foot-tall orangutan living in Eastern Asia called Gigantopithecus blacki. So one of the theories was that either some of the Gigantopithecus might have made it across the land bridge in the woods, or, and this is the really creepy theory, maybe it interbred with humans, because orangutans are known to be attracted to and even on occasion sexually assault human females. So then the theory was, my gosh, Bigfoot is a half orangutan living in the woods. Probably, totally false, but I learned about the orangutans.
It's good to learn these things. Exactly. I feel like.
I think only a weird Yale CIA guy would read that half orangutan person in the woods. Yes, that sounds really good. That's the kind of weirdness that you only get in the CIA.
Okay, here's the point where this is no longer a legitimate segue, but I'm going to tell you guys about how much I love Fortian Times magazine, because it's not that Fortian Times magazine is remotely skeptically minded, but it has, their articles tend to have this presentation of sort of this is what some people said, and occasionally just like weird folklore shit that's obviously supposed to be like, this is, folklore. But there's something about the relaxed attitude that doesn't have like the frantic Alex Jones or the frantic, bright yellow type on a black background type thing, where it's like I almost believe them more because they're kind of like, oh, this is like fun, and this is sort of, in its place. And I don't know, like skepticism is good, but like I want to be able to appreciate Fortian Times magazine without feeling like I'm like causing harm to the entire world with my, I don't know.
And I think Fortian Times does come close in a way to agnosticism, which has its uses, and by that I don't mean the like strict definition of agnosticism where you say, oh, we just can't know about these things. I think that's an unproductive attitude. But both some skeptics and maybe all religious believers would do well to get more comfortable with uncertainty. So if you're dealing with some complex phenomenon and you admit you don't have all the data, it might be okay to say, I don't know, maybe we need some more investigation. And the Fortian Times attitude, at its best, approximates that. Whereas, some jerk skeptics, from the skeptical movement, can get in the habit of just thinking of like, there's a checklist of stuff that doesn't exist that's totally insane nonsense, and there's a checklist of stuff that does exist, and that's all been shown in a lab, and I don't really want to hear about in-between cases because it makes me uncomfortable.
You have to be able to, I don't know, atheist boyfriend he has a bit of the, bless him, like no offense to him, the attitude of like, we can't talk about aliens, sort of because of the probability of their existence is so low that it's just you can't talk about that. And like I always sort of think of it as an idea of like you're having a conversation on a couple of different levels, and this podcast is like a haphazard mixture of both of them, which is why it's ridiculous. But there's the type of alien conversation I had with my friend in like the middle of the South in his pickup truck in the nighttime, like, do you believe in aliens? Well, I don't know, maybe, and then there's the, it's not that it's not fun to be scientifically accurate or realistic, but I don't know that you need to talk about in these mythical or like less than real as we understand it for the moment type things always in terms of like the most highest standard of proof and stuff. But Dan, I always go back to Dan Beer is not wrong that like credulous people cause some serious harm in the world, and that is true, and it's ruining my fun when I try to talk about space aliens.
Because part of it's fun. Just like any other mythology, part of it's just fun, just because of what's built up around it. There's so much. There's so many different types of aliens.
Bob Dylan aliens.
Bob Dylan aliens, science aliens.
I'm really fascinated.
I like thinking about like what is the most plausible kind of alien life form that might try to contact us. Because it's probably not going to be little green men that look just like us, but green with ugly stuff on their head.
Before too long, we're due for Vulcans, so I'm going with Vulcans.
That would be good. There's nothing to fear if Vulcans come to hang out with us.
Vulcans are the best species, hands down.
Don't bet against the cheap robotic probes.
Yeah, there's one of the most distressing, in like a really fun way, things that I've thought about in reference to aliens recently is when Stephen Hawking, I believe, was like, guys, do we want to wantonly send radio signals and basically things that say here we are and we're intelligent enough to send the signal out into the universe? And the implication from like the smart dude that like maybe we should reconsider just alerting the universe to our presence, that gave me the most awesome and alarming sci-fi chills down the spine.
Because what if they're not nice? Not even in a plumbing sense. What if they're just destroyer aliens? That's very likely.
And we're not ready for them. Fundamentally, we're totally not ready for aliens. I'm not ready.
No.
I think AI is the most plausible kind of alien. A robotic, intelligent, self-replicating, self-improving kind of robot that just spawns more of itself.
But not Gort.
That seems to me the most plausible. Like not something.
So what you're
It's too easy
saying
to die.
is
all of that.
resistance is futile.
Yes.
Maybe.
Years from outer space.
All right, so how afraid of aliens or other creatures were you guys as children, and how afraid are you right now? I will
I
say,
was
guys.
very, very, very afraid of aliens as a small child, but I was not afraid of like the, oh my god, they're gonna abduct me or probe me or whatever. It was the thought that like aliens could be around, like just watching my every move and I wouldn't know, and so like the government is really a bigger threat to me right now.
It's true.
Shout out to Fire in the
Natural progression.
You watched Fire in the
Oh, Fire in the Sky. That scared me as a
I'm
boy.
too scared to watch that movie to this day.
What?
When you're a kid, it's so frightening, and then you read up a little bit, and you're like, oh my god, Travis Walton is so full of shit, and will not.
They just made it up. Wow.
So there
Yeah.
are perks to adulthood. The movie Meg is Fire in the Sky, I think it's called.
Yeah.
I've never
Travis
heard
Walton's
of it.
story. It's good. It's really like the abduction scenes or the flashbacks are really like super creepy. And,
I know
like,
many adult men who were telling me how scary the abduction scene in that movie is, so...
Yeah, it's
That
I
doesn't
remember
say a
being
lot,
pretty
but I'll
creeped
check it
out.
out.
I remember being pretty creeped out after watching Signs because I was sleeping in an attic with like these dark corners that just kind of went down, and I kept imagining that they were climbing out, and I had dreams.
Here's the
that,
thing.
like, sort of
Here's the thing about Signs.
No, but Dan!
One,
How old were
CGI
you?
is fucking terrible. Two,
No!
water.
Water, right? The
Water.
water. The water
Spoiler
kills the
alert.
aliens? Really?
Dan, did you watch Signs when you were when it came out, which would have made you what, like 13?
Not terribly old. Come out. Does anybody remember?
What was that?
When did Signs come out?
96, I believe.
No.
Oh my
No.
god!
I
Yeah,
mean, I was
I was way
15
too
years
young.
old, and it was scary. The whole point of it being really embarrassing that I found Signs so scary was that I saw it in
2002.
theaters, and I was 15, which is kind of old.
Okay.
Lucy,
Yeah,
Lucy, that is embarrassing. You should be embarrassed.
Well, I wasn't scared by the movie. I wasn't scared at the movie. I was scared later at night because I was dreaming and I imagined that aliens were crawling up the walls to get me.
Okay, the atmosphere in that movie is fantastic. Like, just ignore the ending if you must, but the atmosphere, the building atmosphere is so awesome, and now I love that movie. So,
I take it back.
Like the movie was really good, other than the horrible part.
But then you realize, like, these aliens came all the way to Earth.
2002.
To harvest us.
Came out in 2002.
And they're allergic to water or whatever. Spoiler. Sorry. Like, really?
Maybe
Like,
it's
those aliens are
fluoride.
dumb.
What if it's something?
It's pretty stupid.
Maybe it's
when
maybe it's
they
chemicals in the water.
It's 2/3 covered
Right.
in water.
Ah.
It was so good. It was
What if
so
it's like
good.
minerals and shit in the water
Water.
or something?
Yeah, it could be. I think you, like, discovered M. Night's big twist for that movie.
That's
Like, he's just been waiting years for someone to figure that out.
the whole like aliens are allergic to Earth thing is just like the easiest cop out of like we can't figure out how to get rid of these aliens. Like this is like the War of the Worlds shit. They just all die.
At least Wells was the first to do it, as far as I know.
Right,
I mean,
yeah, and it was good once, 'cause that was cool, and then everyone else
And it
was
had
like,
colonization sort of. I mean, he was in the Anti-Imperialist League. There was some obvious, like, look what we've done, look what could be done to us type things, which, you know.
I have an idea for a good Twilight Zone episode twist ending with aliens, which would basically be if we believe the idea that AI is the most likely sort of alien contact, have them finally reveal themselves to the Earth, not because they feel humans are ready to embrace them, but because we develop artificial intelligence, and they're just here to talk to our computers, and now we're totally irrelevant.
Oh, that's good.
Todd,
You
that's
should have
really
shared
good.
that. That's good. I like it. No, I like it.
We need to work on this. This is a good idea.
And the reason perhaps for the flying saucer uptick around World War II wasn't because we developed nukes or rocketry or because we were likely to destroy ourselves. It's because we started building computers.
Oh, nice.
Dude, can we...
All right, I'm gonna put my dramatic arts training to use and write this screenplay. Stealing it from you guys. Hope you don't believe in IP.
That's right, we don't. Sorry, Todd.
Actually, I kind of do believe in IP, but I guess that's kind of
Oh.
copyright.
It's aliens and IP. That's 2 strikes.
That's a great idea.
It's true. He's kicked out of the fold. No, it's okay. Yeah, I was really traumatized by The Blob when I was 9, which is ridiculous now. But I was also much more traumatized by Mars Attacks, which obviously is a pure homage to movies like The Blob. But I'm trying to recover from my childhood alien trauma.
We're talking about traumatizing aliens movies. We have to bring up Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
Oh my god.
I never watched that.
I'm still angry about that movie.
Don't do it. The Star Wars prequel of...
Indiana Jones and Aliens would have been fine if they hadn't been terrible in other ways.
Yeah.
Which reminds me that now Chris Pratt is slated to play Indiana Jones in
I oppose.
And
is that confirmed? Or is
I think it's confirmed, and I feel I feel like this is just a continuation of the Crystal Skull. It's
I actually why aren't they making
started watching
movies?
Young Indiana
Aliens
Jones.
and Indiana Jones could have worked, maybe, but it was just and also the weird crystal skull crap. It was so poorly done, and also only weirdos like Dan Aykroyd.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dan Aykroyd is such a
They
weirdo.
raped Indy. They raped Indy.
Does everybody here know who Senator Mike Lee is from Utah?
Yeah, isn't he kind of libertarian?
Of Dan Aykroyd, because in Tommy Boy is the sleazy car salesman. This is totally not. But I
This is why I love politics for people who hate politics, because
I plan it less and less.
Who knows what it's about?
It's about aliens and our love for them. Do you guys want aliens to exist? This is another less rigorous question.
Yes. Hells yes.
Because I would have said no when I was little, or even when I was like a couple of years ago.
I would have never said no. Because the whole concept that humans are the only this kind of intelligent life in the universe is really fucking depressing. So it just is. Because the universe is very, very, very large.
True.
I think it was Arthur C. Clarke who said there are only 2 possibilities. Either we are alone in the universe or we are not. And both prospects are terrifying.
Terrifying. Yeah.
Love it.
Yes.
Love it, Arthur C. Clarke. That's good. That pretty much sums it up, I would say.
I didn't really want aliens to exist until I read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And then I was really depressed that, at just the unlikeliness of me being taken on, an alien adventure.
Do you at least have a towel ready at all times?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
I still haven't read that. I know that's terrible.
What?
Oh, you need to read it. It's
I know.
great.
I know.
We're getting into
aliens used to have existed.
Not acceptable.
So, I want to discover some ancient ruined alien civilizations where they've all died off, and we can find their technology and stuff and dig it up. That would be cool. But getting murdered and having our species wiped out by superior intelligence is
that's
kind of a downer.
It's kind of a bummer.
Yeah.
I feel like we're not going to get murdered. That's probably really, really optimistic. But
we're getting murdered.
As a libertarian elitist, I like to imagine that if there is more intelligent life out there, they're not going to murder us. Because they're also libertarian.
Wouldn't that be great if the aliens came and they're the libertarians, all right?
We can
just spoil that
all you other people can go fuck themselves, but the libertarians, you're cool with that.
Russian science fiction always have aliens that were communists because they're any society smart enough to go to space is going to be communist, right? Because it's just the next thing.
No.
I think that they show up and they're hey, this libertarian thing is the right. What do you have to trade? We're mostly interested in trading with you guys.
Yeah. Carl Sagan would have been so disappointed.
According to the Wachowskis this weekend, when the aliens get here, we'll find out that Mila Kunis is a superhuman alien space princess. And
That's probably true. I mean,
she'll overthrow the whole solar
really
system
attractive.
aristocracy. So there's that to look forward to this weekend, although I've heard the movie is very bad.
Wait, what is this movie?
Jupiter Ascending.
I'm really glad I live under a rock right now.
I don't think it's aiming for realism, though.
No, realism is
Okay.
usually overrated.
So here are a couple of important questions. They're not really that important, but they're important to me.
Please proceed.
1, best alien movie?
Alien.
Alien.
was easy.
Tough.
I don't know. There's a lot of ones I love. I have many ones that are hard to defend my love of. I know the Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which is sort of not typical because it doesn't have saucers and stuff. But I just
Which
love
version?
it so hard. Oh, the original.
Oh yeah,
The
I like
book's
that
actually
one.
pretty good too.
I like the book a lot. I remember the 70s remake really creeped me out.
I like the 70s one, but the 50s one is just like, I love it. It's just so perfect. And the woman's moderately competent, which is all I ask in a 50s movie.
Yeah.
Moderately competent.
Oh, well, even in the book she is, I think, right? But did they number it down a bit for the movie? I don't remember. There was one of them that
Yeah.
I was at a house in Providence once, back right after I graduated from college, and I was with some friends on a second-floor deck, and what's his name, Kevin McCarthy, who starred in the original Invasion of the Body Snatchers, walked by, walking his dog, but I couldn't remember his name because it's so generic. In fact, I just had to remember it now. So I started pointing and said, that's not just some random guy. That's what's his name from Invasion of the Body Snatchers. And all my friends were looking at him and going like, what? That's just some random guy walking by. You mean James Coburn?
Have I been there, Todd?
So it was like I was living a scene from Invasion of the Body Snatchers. He's not one of us. And then I also decided that since I couldn't remember his name, I would just shout, and I said, "Hey, isn't that a famous character actor?" And he turned and waved to me, and nobody saw it except me. And then he went to the corner of the house, and I said, "He waved. It was him." And everybody was like, "He probably just heard you yelling, and so he waved to be friendly." But I'm telling you. He responded because I said famous character actor. Oh, well.
That's awesome.
That's a great story.
I don't know why it's so funny, but it really is. That's the best story I've ever heard.
That was great.
I'm now not sure if I'm laughing at the story or if I'm laughing at Lucy laughing at the
It's
story.
really funny. I don't know why.
That's a great story. Oh, Meg, to answer your question, I really like Mars Attacks, but I also like this movie called Invaders from Mars. I think it was made in the 50s, but it was like the aliens, they drug people, but it makes them drunk.
Wait, isn't that
pretty
Invasion
funny.
of the Saucer Man? Is that
Invasion
the
of the-
titles?
Yeah.
Oh, that movie's awesome. And it's really weird to watch that after you've already seen Mars Attacks, and you're like, oh,
Yeah.
with the big brains and stuff. That movie's great. It's so funny and weird.
Great.
I'd have to say my favorite movie about an alien intelligence whose motivations we'll never understand is probably Oliver Stone's W.
I've never seen that. If I'd known there was aliens involved, the twist at the end, I definitely would have taken a look.
There are reptilians involved, for sure.
It's probably true.
I am really, really partial to Independence Day.
Oh my god, it's such a bad classic.
When I saw Independence Day in the theater, I was like 12 when it came out. But the Bill Pullman speech, people actually stood up and clapped.
They should.
I wish I'd been there.
Me too.
I sat and missed this moment because that was a beautiful, beautiful speech.
Because Bill Pullman in Independence Day is the very best American president.
He's my president. I mean,
yeah, like if I have to choose a president, I'm definitely going with Bill Pullman.
Yeah, no doubt.
Not Morgan
Today
Freeman.
we celebrate our Independence Day.
It's so good. It's just so stirring.
I like Clear Loud Strippers because it's
Jan's really living up to his nickname right now.
I came to
Skeptical Killjoy nickname.
I came to an important realization just in the last 24 hours about aliens and racism, which is that on the Star Trek TV shows, they eventually revealed that the reason the Klingons went through a period of not having lumpy heads was because they had been injected with DNA from Khan Noonien Sin. And of course, Khan Noonien Sin was supposed to be Indian, even though he was played by Ricardo Montalban. So yes, the classic non-lumpy Klingons were Indian.
Figure that out.
Retroactively.
That's, yeah, there's a whole... There are a lot of issues there with Star Trek.
There's so many issues with Star Trek.
You know, Captain Picard is my captain when it comes down to it, because that's what I grew up on. Like, I'd follow him. I would not follow William Shatner into space. I'm sorry.
Oh fuck no, no. I watched
Patrick Stewart though. Hell yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
He's so soothing with his
I
gravitas.
can't
William
watch
Shatner knew where all the bars and all the girls in Golden May bikinis were, and
That's true.
that's my jam.
Although I do appreciate Captain Janeway.
I like Captain.
That woman has balls.
I don't know if I'm ready for a lady captain. I don't think. No, I'm just kidding. I just never watched that one. I don't know if we're ready for that.
Oh, by the way, it occurs to me that although Mila Kunis may not herself believe in aliens like the ones she'll be fighting this weekend, her co-star Laura Prepon from that 70s
Scientologist
show is a Scientologist. Yeah, Hollywood is it's rampant there.
Weird. Speaking of weirdo hotties, there's oh my god, what's her name? Symmetrical face Transformers babe.
Megan Fox?
Yeah, Megan Fox. There's that legendarily awful Esquire interview with her where instead of like indulging all the weird shit she was apparently saying and like copying it down and being like, this is weird, this hottie believes weird things, they literally were just like, oh, she said some weird stuff, and then I stared at how symmetrical her face was. And then, like, I wrote a poem about the symmetry of her face. It was just a wasted interview in Esquire. It's like the epitome of why Esquire is terrible. Now I can never write
like
for them.
they got it right.
I don't get Megan Fox. I just don't get it.
Her face is very symmetrical, and she believes weird things. That's all you need to know.
Okay.
Oh, speaking of aliens movies,
Dan?
the Tom Cruise movie recently, I forget what it's called, but it was entertaining, and it had aliens in it and time travel.
Was that the time,
the
the repeating time one? It was.
Yeah, it's like Groundhog Day, but with aliens. It wasn't bad. I liked it.
Tried to watch it, kept buffering, so we had to keep watching parts of it over and over again. Which was very ironic, but I didn't get to watch it, so it was kind of annoying.
Oh, Attack the Block. That's a good alien movie.
Oh my god, I just watched that. It was
great.
amazing. Sorry. It was so
That
good.
was fantastic.
Oh my god, it was about so many things. Class
was.
and race and aliens and judging people. Attack the Block. Oh my god, it was so good.
You know, on the briefly noted topic of beautiful actresses who probably shouldn't be asked their views, I think it's kind of amusing that young Amber Heard, who was a self-proclaimed atheist and objectivist, and who many people labeled a lesbian when she proudly came out at a GLAAD awards ceremony, is this weekend marrying Johnny Depp on his remote private island. So the lesbian.
Is she to blame for the decline of Johnny Depp in later years? The inequality of.
I think it's a little too. Yeah, he was declining long before.
Maybe she just wants access to an endless supply of scarves and hats.
I would borrow some of those. That's true. It's a good point.
And his, eyeliner. So.
Yeah.
I mean, like both the Tim Burton and the Johnny Depp of Ed Wood. I would like to go back to that, but in later years, there's been some decline from both of them.
Speaking of Ed Wood, I think Plan 9 from Outer Space actually gets a bad rap. I mean, it's awful, but a lot of times people refer to it as the worst movie ever.
Nothing that amazing could be that.
Yeah, there's far worse stuff like Frankenstein Island.
And I'm with Jesse Walker also on Glen or Glenda. Like that is actually the movie is officially turns into genius experimental film that's also really entertaining as opposed to being the worst. It like evolved into something beautiful and almost enlightened, all things considered.
Sort of like Amber Heard's film Drive Angry 3D.
Probably not though.
More like Tommy Wiseau's The Room.
What was that? Oh, yeah, I've never seen The Room. That's another one on my list.
I need to see that.
Yeah, I went to an IHS seminar and I watched it 4 times.
So never again.
I'm still pretty scarred from it. So.
There's an award-winning Harold Pinter play called The Room. They should and they did a video production of it with Annie Lennox and Donald Sutherland. I think they should, or Donald Pleasance, sorry. They should do a double feature of those. Be like a Nobel Prize-winning writer.
I'd go see it.
And then the more recent Room.
Donald Sutherland just makes me think about how I'm still bitter about the movie adaptation of The Puppet Masters.
Oh yeah.
That was such a crime against.
That book is amazing.
I love that book.
Yeah.
And like the lady is so kick-ass, and then they make a movie in the '90s where she's like a scientist but doesn't do anything. And
that's actually what I was thinking of. Yeah.
It's so wrong.
Did you ever see Mothman Prophecies movie? It physically gave me a headache. Like, it's something about the soundtrack or something. I couldn't sit through it. But
I like it. There's like nothing to it, I think, at the end of the day, but I really like the atmosphere of the Mothman Prophecies.
There's nothing to it.
But it has.
What are you saying?
Well, at the end of the day, it's a bit flimsy, let's say, like
Flimsy?
a moth, perhaps. But it's still so good though, because like it has this horrible like fluorescent light, sort of vaguely sickening quality to it in a really good way, which is apparently why you stopped watching it, because it.
I mean, I think I really like his, like John Keel's explanation for like UFOs and weirdness is maybe there's like this component to reality that we'll never be able to understand. That's kind of unknowable and weird and sort of threatening.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, when I think unknowable and weird and kind of threatening, I naturally go straight to Richard Gere, but
it's true. He is that. John Keel signed my copy of the Mothman Prophecies, but he signed it to Susie because he was old, and I was like, all right, fair enough, close enough.
So,
but he spelled it weird too. Never mind. Rest in peace, John Keel. It's fine.
Rest in weirdness, yeah.
Yeah.
The Mothman Prophecies scared the ever-loving hell out of me as a child. That was like seriously the scariest movie.
It's weird. I was traumatized more by trailers for it, but when I finally watched it, it was at 3 p.m. in like a really well-lit room, so I was okay. But I remember being in Salt Lake City visiting my sister, and the trailers were on TV.
Experience it.
It was just, it was really.
There wasn't I think the fact that there wasn't like quite enough substance to the film somehow made it creepier to me.
Yeah. I am a sucker for really good atmosphere.
I had so many questions. Like, it was just very, very creepy. I'm really I'm expecting to turn around and see some weird entity in the window behind me at any moment.
Yeah, no.
Don't turn around. It's definitely there. Do not look behind you.
Yeah, I still, it was only in the last year that I started watching all of the X-Files episodes, as opposed to the ones that had nothing to do with either ghosts or aliens, which, as you can imagine, probably limited my choices in viewing a little bit. I watched it when I was little. I remember Sunday nights, you watch The Simpsons and you watch King of the Hill and you watch the X-Files, except if the alien component was going to be really overt, then you didn't watch the X-Files, and you had to hide away instead. So I'm glad that I now, at the age of 27, am prepared emotionally to watch the X-Files.
I haven't watched the X-Files since I was a little kid. I had this practice of the way our house was set up, my bedroom was upstairs, my parents' bedroom, and the living room obviously was downstairs. And I could sneak down the stairs part way and watch whatever my parents were watching. So I would do that, and I would watch the X-Files and whatever else I wasn't supposed to watch. But I don't really remember anything about the X-Files watching it, but I remember being really, really creeped out. Super, super creeped out. I'm getting nightmares from the X-Files, but I would do it anyway. Just creeped out after I'm supposed to be in bed.
The X-Files for me would make aliens and alien abduction all that less scary because it becomes less weird and more prosaic. It's just guys with black tar coming out of their,
It's true, yeah.
It does that. Where but then you go, if you ever see something that really sort of beggars explanation, that is infinitely more frightening than David Duchovny and shape-shifting alien.
My favorite episode of X-Files by far was the one entitled Jose Chung's from Outer Space, where a writer played by Charles Nelson Riley is asking Scully and Mulder and others to recount an apparent alien incursion in a town.
That episode is amazing. Yeah.
And not only is everybody's version different, but it was the first episode where you start to realize, oh, maybe there actually are gray aliens who we hadn't seen before in the story, and the Air Force is also faking abductions, which was quite a combo.
Someone said that was like the best episode of the show ever, but not the best episode of the X-Files sort of ever, because it's not really a good representation of like what the series is like, but it's just so good that in itself that, yeah.
I would contend it's the one where we figured out what was really going on.
That's really, I watched that one incessantly.
Well, there's the guy who's like the son of the sheriff of the county in New Mexico where all the cattle mutilations happened said, yeah, I know it's totally just government experiments or messing around with some weapon system, and then predators do the rest of it. I'll stick with that explanation because it's most comforting.
We didn't even discuss cattle mutilations. I remember reading the Mothman prophecies when I had a fever, which was a terrible idea. And I got to the part about cattle mutilations, and I was like, the book actually, has UFOs and Men in Black and a lot more than the movie does. When I got to cattle mutilations, I was like, all right, I'm putting this aside for now. We're just putting this away.
Another example where there are multiple explanations and they're all weird is there's a documentary called Mirage Men that's almost entirely about a man who used to work for the government, and it appears, although he could be still lying, that his job was actually to stoke the paranoia of believers in UFOs because the government was interested in seeing whether these people were likely to try sneaking onto military bases. So they and occasionally would rather have those people obsessed with flying saucers than obsessed with real military flights. And eventually he, rather famously, drove one guy insane, and he had like a complete paranoid schizophrenic breakdown and thought he was in contact with aliens.
Oh, God. That's not good.
And then to add to the weirdness, add to the layers, after this whole like 90-minute documentary about how it was his job as a government worker to basically drive people nuts, but how there was nothing to the alien claims he was feeding them. At the very end, they ask him, so how did you get into this line of work? And he basically says, well, when I was a young man in the Air Force, they showed us a film of the actual aliens. and so I was fascinated from that point on with the UFO community. Now, most likely it's still lying.
That guy's an asshole.
Does it count as giving away the twist ending if it's a documentary? But it was a disturbing moment for the film anyway. And by the way, speaking of multiple narratives, I know a guy whose family is from Roswell, and he claims that like everybody there knows it's true. Like he says his father grew up knowing all these old people who said it's true, but the military said they're really gonna screw with us if we tell the truth. So everybody just has to keep their mouths shut. By contrast, National Review writer Andrew Stutterford took a trip to Roswell, and he, with equal plausibility, says if you go around and question people, at first they'll say, oh, there's aliens and there was some wreckage and stuff, and then if you keep pushing them, you realize they're telling tall tales in exactly the way that people in Salem, Massachusetts do to stir up tourism. Oh, yeah, we saw like 3 saucers, and some of us got abducted, and here's a souvenir. So.
See, I love that, because I want to go to Roswell at some point just because obviously the Americana aspect to that story is great.
Lucy, I feel like
what happened. Yes.
At some point in the future, maybe like next summer or something, we should do like a road trip where we go like all over the U.S.
That sounds so beautiful. I would love to do that. I want to go look at the scary signs surrounding Area 51 that tell me how I can't trespass. Also, let me just say that Dan Beer says he had to go, but I would like to think that we drove him away with our credulity.
We did. Like he can't deal with it. He really can't.
Going back to Roswell real quick, the UFO, the 4th of July weekend at the UFO Festival, which is a whole lot of fun. Willie Nelson used to play there.
That's awesome.
Reason to go. But yeah, we should all totally go to Roswell next summer.
That's my new dream. Oh my God.
Do you see 6 Days in Roswell?
No.
It's on Hulu. I don't know if it's on regular Hulu or if you have to have Hulu Plus. But it's about this guy. I can't remember his name, but he's from Minnesota, and he wants to be abducted by aliens, I guess. Richard Kronfeld. So he goes during the during like the 50th anniversary, and it's just like he stays in some camper that some old guy has, and he has to stay with these like 2 dogs, I guess.
I know what I'm doing later tonight.
Yeah, and he, I didn't watch the whole thing, but he like talks. Yeah, he interviews all these like alien people dressed as aliens, alien lovers. There's a musical. They have a little excerpt from it. I don't know if it's still going. I don't know if it'll be there this summer, but
I know that Dan Beer is not like a robot, like I was teasing him with him being the killjoy of this chat, but like fundamentally human nature, like human society, and like all of the ridiculous stories that we tell, and like what we swear happened in the sky last night, like the world might be better if people realized like what proof actually means, but like it's just so much bullshit. Is just so much fun, except when I turn on the History Channel and there's nothing historical on. That actually pisses me off sometimes.
Since Dan's not here, I feel like I have to put in the skeptical and say that science and the real universe are plenty mind-blowing already. Without nonsense. But by the way, if you ever want to have an experience similar to going to Roswell and trying to be abducted, I know a guy who, once again, should remain nameless because he might be embarrassed, but he...
David Fromm, isn't it? No, I'm just kidding.
No. He went through a period of...
Bill Crystal, got it.
He went through a period of believing very much in the aliens, and he drove by, or sort of through, Area 51. You can get fairly close to it anyway, and you don't see any aliens, but because it is a military facility, he said, if his experience is any indication, if you drive by late at night, you do get followed by big SUVs with sort of CIA-looking guys. And when he stopped at one point at a roadside rest stop and went to use the urinal, one of the guys actually like came in and sort of stood next to him, watching him the whole time, and was wearing shades in the whole 9 yards. So they'll throw you out.
I want to do this so badly.
I mean, like that's I totally buy that.
Urinal bit, like I'm good without that part.
But I totally buy that happened because it is a military base and there is covert shit happening, and because if you work there, wouldn't you try to freak people out in exactly that way? Wouldn't you go like the extra mile and wear sunglasses necessarily?
Yes.
And maybe act a little weird in case someone thought you might be a man in black.
New life stream. That's what I want to do. How do I do this?
My dad actually knew a guy that worked at Area 51.
Without being involved with the government.
Yeah, that's... What was that, Seth?
My dad knew a guy who worked on Area 51 when they were building it, or one of those installations. And what they had done, it was really interesting the way it was so compartmentalized. Back in the 70s or whatever, they would get like the guy's an electrician, and they would go and they would work. They go out on a bus with blacked out windows, and then they would walk. They'd be taken right to the door. They'd work in one building of one room, and if like construction ran long or whatever, they would switch out crews. So everyone only saw one building, one room. You could never put together the whole thing. And they couldn't go outside for most of the day because they knew when the Russian satellites were passing over.
Yeah.
Which is just like fascinating to me. Back in the 70s, they could kind of figure all that out.
Some of that stuff's in the book I mentioned that seemed credible until the ridiculous ending, and I think a lot of it probably is credible. She just like lost her goddamn mind at the end. But it makes sense that that's how you would treat your employees at your secret base, like that they would. It makes sense. So I guess, has anything unexplained ever happened to any of you? That's the other unasked question.
I grew up in a house that was supposed to be haunted.
And?
I was too young to experience it. I was a baby, but everyone who lived in that house, quite a few people lived in it, had roughly the same experiences of unintelligible voices talking to each other, and by the sort of cadence, you could tell that they were having conversations, or laughing, or arguing, and they would respond to, like, if you yelled at them or shut up, they would be quiet, and they'd start whispering. I've also seen the Marfa lights, which are incredibly hard to explain to yourself.
And what's that?
They're lights in this sort of remote part of West Texas, out in the desert. It's out in the middle of the desert, and there's these strange lights that. The closest thing I can describe them is, you know, like a blob inside of a lava lamp, how it sort of changes and splits off and does all these different things. Imagine something like a light doing that in midair out in the desert in front of you.
Sounds cool and slightly unnerving.
Yeah.
And there are enough phenomena like that, I will say. I wouldn't be shocked if someday we find out, you know, we've never been visited by aliens, but that plasma balls that glow float around in the atmosphere much more frequently than we would have imagined. It just seems like there are a lot of stories that involve spheres of light, or, you know, the Hestelin lights that have been photographed passing across a Scandinavian canyon periodically. I don't know. If things like ball lightning may be real, and certainly the northern lights are, I suppose there could be other strange meteorological type phenomena we don't know about.
Oh, and I worked in a haunted. I did see a ghost at a hardware store. I don't believe in ghosts, but I saw one. So,
yeah, that happens. I mean, I had a friend who saw ghosts, and he swears he doesn't believe in them, but he saw something.
I don't believe in them, but there's no other explanation for what I saw and what my friends saw. We saw independently of each other and didn't ever speak of it until one day we all like, hey, have you seen that? It's a long, complicated, weird, creepy story, but there's no other way to explain it than like, you know, something beyond science happened, so we can't understand scientifically.
Well, wait, so I'm curious then, why don't you believe in ghosts if you had that experience?
I mean, just sort of ghosts as we understand them, like some restless spirit or something like that. I personally don't. What it was it was this hardware store that was really old, and we would all see this old man in 1930s garb standing, looking very angry, in different parts of the store. It's so real enough that we thought he was like a customer waiting for somebody to go give him like some lumber or a sack of concrete or something. But then, though, you know, it's really, really hot in El Paso, so something I've just been out in the sun too long, and never spoke of it until somebody said, "Hey, have you ever seen that old guy? You ever think you see an old guy out in the yard?" And we all, yes. And then we all started talking about it, and we all realized we had described the exact same person, and that was very odd. And so the owners, this hardware store had been in the family for a long time. The owners went and asked their parents, and they said, "Well, that sounds exactly like the guy who was beaten to death on this property back in the
Oh, God.
What the fuck?
Yeah, I don't believe, like, that doesn't make any sense. But to get even creepier, this is, what, 15, 20 years later since I worked there, there's a woman who works there now who has a son who's autistic. And he has kind of, you know, things that go along with that, and sometimes he has some trouble with public spaces and things like that. And he'd gotten in there a couple of times and was absolutely frightened and kept staring at something right behind her. She's a cashier, like right behind where she stands at the register. And he would just kind of shut down. He was over, and they finally got him calmed down and figured out what was going on. And she had no idea. I mean, no one had ever told her about it. But he said, there's a man wearing farmer clothes standing behind you, and he's very angry.
Oh, dear.
Yelled it. I can't explain any of that, but I still don't believe in ghosts. So.
Something, though. That's... I would just say that I haven't seen anything scary because for most of my life I really didn't want to see anything scary, and but I think that if I asked my sister what she believes she's seen, I would probably be unable to sleep tonight. What was that, Meg?
No, I am also in the camp of, like, I refuse to see anything scary, therefore I'm not going to see anything scary. And that's mostly true.
Mm-hmm.
However, so, like, the house that I grew up in, like, mostly grew up in from, like, 5, I think, or not quite 5, like, almost 5 until I was, like, 12. That whole neighborhood was fucked, basically. The theory is that it was built on, like, an ancient Indian burial ground or something.
Oh, no!
Too many weird things happened in that neighborhood. Like, way too many. And this one house in particular, something bad happened, like, before we moved there. And I don't really remember. I think it was, like, it was like a couple, and the dude beat his wife to death with a baseball bat, which, like, that's pretty bad, right? But then, like, the next family that moved into that house, the teenage son one day just, like, murdered his parents, like, while we were living there. Like, they just murdered.
God.
Yeah, it was pretty gruesome. And then I think, let's see, there was a family that lived there after that. Like, these are kind of, like, I was pretty young, so a lot of these memories are really fuzzy. But they had a fire that, like, completely gutted the house, basically. And the whole reason for the fire was, like, really, really weird. These are, like, terrible details that I don't remember. But, like, a lot of weird and bad stuff happened in that house in particular.
Yeah.
Then, like, an addition onto the neighborhood, like, adding more houses and stuff, the construction crew was, like, complaining about, I'm not kidding, complaining about power tools not plugged up, turning on, and going off with them. Like, I'm not kidding. I wish I were kidding, but I'm not. And the house that I lived in, it was, like, we had, like, a full downstairs and, like, a half upstairs, so it was my bedroom, a very, like, large hallway, and then my dad's office. And so I was, you know, upstairs by myself. And I like to attribute this to a kid's overactive imagination, but I kind of can't because of, like, all the other stuff going on. But I would hear footsteps constantly. I would hear, like, my music box would just, like, randomly start playing on its own. It was, like, so bad that I spent most of my night sleeping in my parents' room. I was terrified all the time. And to make matters worse, my mom would, like, see figures, like, walking around or, like peeking through the door or something. And then our neighbor, like, the little girl that lived next to me, who we were friends, and then our moms were friends. And then our moms got to talking one day, and they're like, so do you ever, like, do things in your house? Like, people in your house? And, like, yeah, that kind of happens sometimes.
So when you said you've seen nothing, you mean you've seen constant ghosts happening, possessions, and
like,
basically they follow you around everywhere.
But it was mostly that neighborhood. Like, I've never really had. This sounds so completely ridiculous, but one night, my mom and I, and this was, like, not terribly long ago. I mean, it was probably close to 10 years ago, but I was no longer, like, a little kid. My mom and I were just kind of driving around our hometown talking, and we went through the old neighborhood, and we saw, at the same time, because we both kind of, like, looked at each other and, like, wait, did you see that? It was, like, this dog that was, like, in a yard and then just vanished.
Wow.
And that sounds, like, crazy and ridiculous, and I'm choosing to chalk it up to, like, a hallucination or something. I don't know. But it was weird and creepy, and I like to not think about those things or that neighborhood. Like, there was something wrong with that neighborhood.
Yeah, I'm not going to that neighborhood. I'll give you that.
No, I would recommend not doing that. There's something wrong there.
One time, my mom and I thought we were having a hallucination about a raccoon, but it was actually just a real raccoon climbing on our cereal shelves. So that's good. You know, I stared at it for like 5 seconds. I was like, "Mom," and she literally didn't see it because it was so inexplicable to have a raccoon climbing on the cereal shelves. So it's like I thought I was hallucinating for like a really like palpable 10 seconds. I'm like, "Oh, yeah. Mom, do you see that?" Or
it's like raccoon.
Yeah. That's my paranormal experience. A raccoon that was actually there. So
I think my favorite like paranormal story though is so I've always really enjoyed going to Colonial Williamsburg. Mm-hmm. And there's this one house. I can't remember the name of the family now. I'm related to them somehow though. The Peyton Randolph house. I'm related to his wife. Mm. Somehow. I'm like a descendant or something. I don't remember. But so the Peyton Randolph house is like this really like big brick red house in Colonial Williamsburg. And for some reason, like we didn't like tour that house until I was older, like after I was married. And so I'd always been creeped out by it. I wasn't sure why, but it just like gave me really bad vibes. And I didn't really know anything about it. Like, I just didn't learn anything about this particular house or that family or whatever. But then one of the more recent times I went to Colonial Williamsburg with my family, like, we found out that's, like, the most haunted house in Colonial Williamsburg. But one of the stories that they tell, and, of course, I don't know if this is true or anything, but one of the stories that they tell about that house, kind of reluctantly, is that one of the security guards, who's like a big dude, very skeptical dude, like doesn't believe in this bullshit, went on one of like his nightly rounds or whatever to the house, and he was like going down into the basement, and something happened, and he quit his job. He immediately quit his job and refuses to talk about what happened. So that's like really, really fucking creepy. And like all of these people died in this house. Like all these terrible things happened. And
Maybe
if
he
you
was
go on the tour
tired
or
of
whatever, it
colonialism.
feels really, like maybe that is a legit thing to be tired of colonialism.
I'm tired of this historical accuracy.
I'm pretty fucking tired of colonialism myself. But yeah, I don't know. That house is creepy. But I really recommend going on like ghost tours of Colonial Williamsburg because it's fun.
Oh, you know what? That reminds me of my other banal ghost story, like deeply banal, which is that I went to Gettysburg with my friend, and he was telling me many exciting, solid ghost stories about Gettysburg.
Solid ghost stories? They were solid.
Solid.
But like, it was like kind of off season, so like it was great. The battlefield was all empty and stuff. And at some point, I was near Pickett's Charge, and I smelled cigar smoke. I was like, oh, it's got to be a ghost. I smell that. It's happening. And then it was a guy smoking a cigar. It was really disappointing.
I really like that story though. Like I
wish it's an actual man smoking an actual cigar.
It was a very solid ghost.
I don't have any good stories at all. It's rough.
I can't believe I just told this ridiculous, like, half-assed story on something that's being recorded.
Even if it turns out that none of the paranormal phenomena exist and it's all just psychological, it's interesting in itself how predictable and recurring some of those psychological phenomena must be. My own mother had the sort of classic ghost experience, which both she and I, probably just psychological, of waking up in the middle of the night, she thought, perhaps just dreaming, and thinking she saw a sort of big white hovering sphere in front of her that looked almost like it was trailing gas out the bottom, almost like if you drew a cartoon of it, it would look like a kid's cartoon of a ghost.
Yeah.
And it seemed to be, it terrified her, but seemed to be communicating, it will be all right, it will be all right. And my mother just remembers saying, what the hell was that? A few hours later, her father called and said her mother had died.
Oh, shit.
Oh, wow.
So it's probably just a case of, mom having other nightmares like that she doesn't remember because they weren't correlated with an important psychological experience like that. But she may also have realized her mother was ailing and sort of, on a subconscious level, been under a lot more stress and thus more likely to have such an experience. And things like that sure do seem to happen a lot. People are under terrible stress when loved ones die, and it's common for them, it appears, to hallucinate the recently deceased loved one very often, which is interesting in itself, even if there isn't an actual paranormal element to it. Actually, in a similar way, one of the creepiest psychology stories ever to happen in human history, perhaps, sort of involves the UFOs. 21 years ago in Zimbabwe, 60 children came running in from recess at a school, and they weren't just like children who'd never heard of airplanes or something like that. I mean, they were fairly well educated and wealthy by the standards of the region. And also ethnically diverse, and there was some diversity in age. They came running in from recess and said, this hovering disc-like craft just landed outside, and a little man in what looks like a black jumpsuit came out and was watching us with huge eyes, and was surrounded by these other smaller craft. And the kids urged the teachers to come out and look at this thing, huge numbers of the kids, and the teachers all thought it's some game they're playing, ignore it. And so none of the adults saw this if there was anything there. But the kids so adamantly stuck to their story that documentarians came within a few days and interviewed the kids, and we now have hours of footage of the kids describing what they saw, and they not only did they stick to their story, but they were re-interviewed 16 years later as adults, and in 2010, and many of them, of course, if you believed it when you were a kid, you might just repeat it to yourself and believe it all the more when you're an adult. But they stick to the story 16 years later, and even express the kinds of doubt and uncertainty you would expect from people who actually had some sort of experience. It's like some of them will say, I try not to think about it, but I suppose if there were one day I could revisit to figure out what actually happened, it would be that one. And then there are others who say, I think it was aliens, and I hope they come back. I'd be delighted to talk to them. And then adding to the weirdness, one of the people who interviewed them was a notoriously pushy psychiatrist who believed in alien abductions, who has since passed away, John Mack. So he may have simply nudged the kids unwittingly in the direction of the preferred narrative. But it's amazing how effectively he did, I gotta say. Of course, we all know kids can be, easily manipulated.
Satanic sex abuse scandal always comes to mind.
But some of the kids were like 12 and 11 and so forth. They weren't all like, 6-year-olds. And you can watch hours of them being very articulate with their quasi-British sounding accents on YouTube, saying things like, I have not been influenced by my friends. I know what I saw, and so forth. It's a little disturbing.
I believe it. From your retelling of the story, I believe it.
This is the kind of thing that Todd sends me at like 2 in the morning. I'm like, Todd, I'm not going to watch that because it's 2 in the morning, and I sleep poorly enough as it is.
Todd, like as someone apparently with Lucy's like sleep issues and like aliens are a bit scary issues, stop doing this to her. That's very
just the daylight, Todd. The daylight.
Yeah, I mean, do it, but
only Mothman from now on.
I keep going back to sort of Mothman, like either there's some weird component to reality we just will never be able to completely understand, or we have weird psychological things in our brains that make us see things that aren't, we use fantastic things that aren't there and believe in them. And what possible purpose could that serve?
Yeah.
It's fun.
I know, right? That's my really undramatic premise to this entire talk.
I think one reason for that tendency to exist, and we've probably all heard this before, is that there's a certain efficiency to spotting patterns. And if your brain is anticipating patterns, it may sometimes spot ones that aren't really there. But it's worth the risk for your brain to constantly be anticipating. And actually, as Jesse Walker from Reason has written about, one of the most common patterns that we instinctively anticipate is seeing minds or beings like our own, because those are the most important elements of your environment, were the most important elements of our evolutionary environment when our brains were forming. You need to know if there are other people, if there are enemies, if there are friends. And so, you see a cloud, you think it looks like a face, you see a shape in the woods, you're inclined to think like, oh, it could be a person, it could be a giant hairy man beast.
But like the exciting appearance of like what appears to be a creature, that's not totally logical to me though. Like it makes more sense to say, okay, conspiracy theories, okay, I'm gonna think that's all connected more than it is because that's. But like
ultimately, the human brain is a storytelling machine. So if you find something and you can't explain it, you're going to concoct some story to explain it because that's how your brain works.
Yeah.
You're also instinctively primed not just to anticipate people and patterns, but also predators. There's a reason that even one-year-old babies know that something with fangs and claws looks like a threat, and they're not learning that from the environment. That's instinct.
And because they were raised by aliens and they have a lingering memory of the horror that was inflicted upon them.
That as well, yeah. It's really unfortunate.
So I think like dragons have sometimes been pointed to as an example of something that probably didn't exist in history, but it may be instinctive.
Definitely did exist in history.
Thank you, Max.
But it makes sense that we would instinctively anticipate that danger looks like some combination of a snake, a big cat, and something poisonous. So it could be that independent groups of human beings instinctively were drawn to those same sort of predator images as something to fear.
I seem to remember reading, I think it was in Fortian Times, that like Switzerland doesn't have as many UFO sightings as most industrialized nations do, but they have like an abnormally high record of dragon sightings.
That's where dragons are from. So.
Also Iceland. So I feel that Iceland is the best country in the world because the majority, yes, the majority of their citizens believe that elves exist.
Yeah.
I think that's just a beautiful thing.
They plan around, like, that rock belongs to the elves. They have to build a road around it.
That is so ridiculous and gorgeous, and they're just a beautiful people.
Well, Bjork does exist.
Also,
Bjork is an elf.
An independent confirmation of the existence of Bjork.
Yonsei of Sigaros is also definitely an elf man.
Why does the view of Lucy's room look scarier now?
Because my computer was dying, and I thought we should wrap this up, but I also need to charge my computer. And also because...
Lucy Steigerwald is an alien, in case you guys didn't know. I mean, it says so on her lower third or whatever the hell it's called. Or no,
this is a good ending. I should have planned it like this, but I didn't. My computer was just going to die any second, and that would have been a really inauspicious ending to our journey together. Guys, as much as this is beautiful, I should probably wrap this up in an official sense. Though we should have ended with, I don't know, Buddy Holly being an alien, or Elvis being an alien, or whichever rock stars are secretly aliens.
Because he looks like Buddy Holly. He's an alien.
It's true. That explains a lot. Do we have any final words on space aliens or other important entities?
I will say the two guys that wrote the book Witness to Roswell claim that on May 5th they will unveil photographs that it sounds like they actually did find in a shoebox from 1947 or thereabouts, owned by a couple of rich, well-connected people, a lawyer and a geophysicist, that they've had dated and authenticated as real Kodak paper stock from back in the day, that look for all the world like they're photos of the Roswell aliens being dissected.
I'm so ready, Todd. I'm in my bunker.
May 5th, they're going to do a press conference.
Lucy, like, go ahead, like, schedule a special episode.
What if they disappear before then? May 5th is a long time away. Like, a lot of...
Why May 5th, actually? Yeah, like, why are we waiting this long?
It's the day after Star Wars Day? I don't know.
Avengers Age of Ultron.
Oh, yeah.
There we go.
Building the hype.
Well, you know what? We'll probably need to have a podcast when that auspicious day comes. Let me wrap this up officially, because good God. Thanks to Dan Beer, who left, our resident killjoy, who we love very much. Thanks to Meg, and thanks to Seth and Zach, and thanks to Todd Seavey, the catalyst for all of this madness. I will link to all y'all's important websites when I put this up.
That's not a good idea.
Thank you, Lucy.
Guys!
Keep watching the skis, as Leonard Nimoy said in The Simpsons. Or no, you guys.
The truth is out there.
Yes, it is. It really is.